Hi there, folks. Amanda Villotini here. Going to get started momentarily. We'll just wait another moment or so for some more people to join in before we get started. I'll do my little housekeeping bit here. You'll find that there's no audio for you to speak during the webinar, but there is a chat that if you do have any questions throughout, you can throw those into the chat. What I try to do is as I go through things, I'll either answer them as I see them come up, or we'll take a look and see if it's going to come up throughout the webinar, maybe at a later time. Anything that I'm not able to answer right away, I will do my best to get back to you with answers, but you can always reach out to our support team. The Goal Line support team is available at goallinesupport@stacksports.com. And then our customer success email address is also available to you, customersuccess@stacksports.com. Lots of folks coming in. Excellent. Okay. So today's webinar is, the topic of today's webinar is going to be website admin permissions. So this is really just going to be talking about the permissions, not so much the functionality behind those permissions. You may also be interested in the last webinar that we had put on, which I think was 4 weeks ago. They're usually 3 weeks, but we were a little delayed in this one here. So there was a previous webinar that went over the new Goal Line user interface that you see when you're logged into the back end, and that had a bit of an overview of what each of those features is good for. But we've also, of course, done quite a few other webinars in this series that talk about more specific types of functionality. So if you're interested in registration or scheduling, that kind of thing, then some of those previous webinars might be of interest to you. If you didn't register for them, but you received an email about them, you can generally just follow the link in those emails to, it will ask you, I think, to register, but then it will show it to you on demand. So you'll be able to watch a recording. And my general encouragement is whenever you see those notifications about webinars coming up, if you can always register, even if you know you can't attend, what happens if you're registered in advance is that you'll automatically be emailed a link to the recording of the webinar. So if you're not sure if you can attend, because they're generally on Tuesday afternoons at 3 Eastern for Atlantic here. So if you're not able to attend that time, but you want to watch the webinar, register for it, and you'll get an email of it, and you'll be able to watch it whenever you'd like. So, yeah, that is our little preamble there. So today we're going to talk about website admin permissions. We're going to take a look at how do we create a website admin, what are the association-wide permissions, what are team-specific and what are league-specific permissions, and then I'll also take a look at what recommended permissions you would want to grant to someone in your organization based on the role that they have, just kind of in general terms. So Brian, yes, can you get links to the previous webinars if you're new admins? If you haven't received those, what I would do is I would send a quick email to customersuccess@stacksports.com, and what we'll do is we'll get a listing of those for you. We're working on putting them in our FAQ or our knowledge base so that anybody can go and find them. But for now, if you want to just send us a quick email there, we can get you the link to the previous webinars. So we'll go ahead and get started now. I am sharing a screen over here. So we're looking at a couple of demo sites. And if any of you have been in some of my webinars or trainings before, these demo sites are probably starting to look really familiar. But it's fun to have demo sites that we can just play around in and make all kinds of crazy changes. I do have both a gold layout and a silver layout shown here. Permission-wise, the layout that you have doesn't really make any kind of difference. There's not really any differences when it comes to permissions. There's really just one feature that's available on the silver site that's in your site configuration that allows you to configure that homepage, but the permission set is going to be exactly the same. So there's not really going to be any differences there. I will point out that some folks will have a difference when it comes to the features that are available. So you may not have the ability to grant permission, for example, to referee tools if you don't have the referee system enabled on your site in any way, shape, or form. And so there could be some items that you don't have access to because you don't have those features enabled. Things like registration won't be there if you don't have registration enabled and that kind of thing. Using the new UI, I will apologize if I'm a little clunky because I'm still getting used to it. I was using the old layout for such a long time that my muscle memory sometimes fails me here. But the first thing that we'll talk about is where do we go to find our website admin feature. And you do have to have permission to edit website administrators to be able to click on this tool. Otherwise, it's going to be gray for you and you won't be able to click on it. But if you are a main contact, or if that's part of your role is to help administer other accounts, then you should definitely get that permission. If you should be a main contact, but you're not currently right now, that's something that you would reach out to our goal line support team about. We do just need to have at least confirmation in writing from whoever we do have listed as a main contact to confirm that we should in fact be granting you that permission. There's a bit of checks and balances in there for that. But we're going to start in the people section here. So you'll select people, and then people's going to be grouped into those different subcategories of players and parents, settings, teams, coaches, and reports. The manage website admins is going to be found in your settings area here. So you'll find manage website admins. If you're really unsure, because these are all text descriptions, you can just use the Control F to search for things there. So I'm going to click into manage website admins. My demo site obviously has quite a few of these. You may not have that many. Quick note, there is an unlimited number allowed of website administrators. You don't have any limit on how many people can have website admin permissions. The permissions that we'll take a look at, they're not unique permissions. It's not like only one person can do this one thing. So they are available for everybody. So just right off the bat, when we are looking at this list, I can edit an existing user at any time, and I can edit all kinds of things about them. I can edit their information, their permissions, and the goal line support team would be able to indicate that they are in fact a main contact if they should have full permissions to everything. The disable and enable is available here too. So if I click on this, it's just going to allow a checkbox over here where I can say I want to disable these administrators. This is a great tool if you want to disable somebody because they're not active in the current season, but you know that they're going to be doing something again in the future season. So that's just something to keep in mind, that you can enable or disable multiple administrators at a time. So if you wanted to maybe turn off all of your schedulers for a bit, or if you wanted to turn off all of the team specific roles and that kind of thing, you can certainly do that. You can also delete multiple administrators. This is different than disabling them. So if I disable them, I can enable them again in the future. If I delete them, I have to add them back as a new administrator. I'd be creating a brand new administrator. This is something that you may do if somebody's username, if they want their username to be updated to something else, because one item that we can't change in a website admin is going to be the username. And then as you can see, we can also export our user information, and I'm going to touch on user roles towards the end of the webinar here today. So the first thing we'll do, we'll go ahead and click to add an administrator. And when I go to add an administrator, I do again see the manage user roles here, but we're going to talk about that later on. I can either create a league administrator or a team administrator. And the reason that we have both of these options available here is because whether you're a league, well, actually, you may not see the league administrator. I should point that out right away. If you are strictly a club and the only thing you have on your system is going to be rep teams, like club teams that play in an outside league, or even whether that outside league is with goal line or not, you may only have the ability to create league style administrators. So if you don't see the league admin, that's not an issue unless you actually have leagues, in which case that would be something to reach out about. So creating a league administrator and a team administrator do have consequences. So you do want to make sure that you're selecting the right one. And we'll point out kind of some of the main differences here. I think the main difference is going to be a league administrator is going to be able to select this league control panel and manage things at a league level, which is going to include the ability to manage some of the team, like the team information within their league. So if they have permission for the soccer league, they're going to also be able to manage the team level things that are applicable to the soccer league, but they wouldn't have access to the teams that are part of the lacrosse league and that type of thing. So the league level of administrator, if you are a league coordinator, league convener, if you're a referee assigner, if you're just kind of a general member of the association and you do all kinds of different things, the league style administrator is going to be the one you'll want to select. Team specific administrators are exactly that. So they would only be able to be granted access at the team level. They can have access to more than one team, but they would not have any access to the league level of their team. And so it's strictly team permissions, things like managing that one specific team roster, reporting games that involve that one specific team, and that style of thing. So we'll look at league administrator first. And then the first thing that we'll talk about is just this information that's being collected up here at the top. So first name and last name and email address, phone number, title, and username. So most of that's pretty straightforward. Obviously, the email address does have to be valid. When we create a website administrator, they will receive their login credentials with their temporary password through email, and they will have to click on that link from their email account. And there is a time sensitivity to that. So a password reset or a username and password being sent to them is going to be time sensitive. They have 1 hour to click on that link so that they can reset their password from the temporary password to their own personal password. So we do want to make sure that that email address is valid. It's an email address that they can check. And the email address that's used is also used in other areas when if this person is going to send emails through Goalline to any of their recipients, then the email address used in their profile is the email address that will be used as the reply to. The email will come from do-not-reply@goalline.ca, but if they do happen to try to reply, rather than have that email bounce, it will return to the person who was logged in when that email was sent. So it's a good idea for that to both be valid and be something sort of organization specific. So if you have a set of email accounts like treasurer@northeastofficials.com, great. Or sometimes I'll see people with some Gmail addresses like northeastregistrar@gmail.com, things like that. So having an email address that you want to show there that's easily checked is a good idea. The phone number is not required, but it is strongly recommended, especially in the case of potentially maybe the support team needing to reach out to an administrator. It is a great idea to include a valid phone number. The title is important because of your list. When you're looking at your website administrators, especially if you do end up with quite a large list, it is going to be ideal to include an accurate title. So if they're a scheduler, make them the scheduler. If they're a scheduler for only a single division, then they can be maybe the U11 boys scheduler. And that way you can look at your list of website administrators, and even if you don't know who it is, like what the first and last name of the person is, you'd at least be able to see the title that they have. So that's going to be really useful there. The username you can create by yourself, or you can allow the system to generate it automatically. And if you select for the system to generate that automatically, it's going to take their first initial and their last name and potentially tack on a couple of zeros, because it does have to be a minimum of 6 characters. And so if the first initial and last name isn't 6 full characters, then it's going to add zeros for the rest of that. So if it makes more sense to you to just create a username manually, then you can certainly do that. If you wanted the username to be similar to the title, then that's a nice, easy way to remember what that username might be. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you are using the referee system, or if you're baseball, the umpire system, you'll have this option here for whether or not they are the referee or umpire or official in chief. This is really only going to be a useful thing to do if you actually are using the referee system. But just keep in mind that if they are in fact the referee in chief, then you should say yes to this, because that's going to give them some of their some of the additional features that come with the advanced ref system are going to be applicable to that referee in chief position. So that actually covers just the first part of what do I need when I'm creating a user, and this is going to apply whether it's a league user or a team specific user or a referee assigner. So this little bit at the top here is kind of generic. Goal line is the one that would indicate whether or not they are the main contact. That's what this little checkbox is for. I probably should have logged in as someone who's not not goal line, but now you can see how we make that little checkbox there, and we do need to make sure that that is a proper contact to apply that. that setting to, because then it makes basically all of the granular permissions that we're going to discuss next, it kind of makes them obsolete, because saying that they're the main contact gives them full permissions regardless of their role. So that brings us to our association-wide permissions, and I'm going to see what I can do to make my screen a little bigger here, just to have this a little wider for us so that we can see a little better. Hopefully that's nice and easy to read, because it's sideways. And as you can see, there's also a lot of very specific permissions in here. When we're talking about association-wide permissions, we're specifically talking about things that are done that apply to the entire organization, whether it's teams or leagues, or the main the main menu, the master menu. If you're looking at the website, communication tools related to the website, a news article at the master menu level is a news article that's displayed directly on your home page. Whereas if I'm adding a news article from my league specific menu, it's adding that news to my league specific pages, and it's not going to be accounted in my my home page news article. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're looking at some of these permissions, because we will see, especially in communication and scheduling tools, we're going to see a lot of overlap. We're going to see that there's a communication and a scheduling section in the league admin tools as well as the team admin tools, but we start getting more and more granular. So when we're talking association-wide, if I can upload a schedule here, that means I can upload a schedule for any league or any team in the entire association. If that permission is granted to me down in a league specific, it means I can only upload a schedule for that one specific league, and all the teams, of course, that belong to that league. So that's what we mean when we're looking at association-wide permissions, and these are definitely permissions that you want to make sure are provided to the appropriate people. We'll take a look first at the communication tools section. So the communication tools here is going to kind of combine the menu items of your email and website tools. So if we scroll back up and see our menu here, so anything that's found in your email area here or your website area here, those are what we're talking about when we're talking about communication tools. So sending emails, creating news articles, uploading files that can then be used on web pages, or used to link to in an email for someone to download as an attachment, that kind of thing, and sending an email announcement. All of these things at the master menu level. So the permissions we can specifically grant out are going to be the ability to create a news article, the ability to upload or remove files. So these aren't necessarily just using images in line. If I have permission to create a web page, for example, I'm able to upload images as part of creating a web page, but I'm not able, unless I have this permission, I'm not able to upload a file to the system so that someone else would be able to kind of link to that file or download that file. So that is its own specific permission. Sending email announcements is taking, again, that email section of your master menu and letting you use the email announcement tool. If you have other permissions, you are still going to be able to send certain types of emails from the system, but sending a general email announcement that could go to any participant, including your website admins or email subscription lists, that is the permission that you're going to have here. So email announcements is to be able to send general email announcements to any and all people that are associated in your site. Events are for your event listings, and again, this is something you'll find at the team and league specific level as well. So events will show up on your master schedules, and they'll also show up anywhere that you've selected to display upcoming or next events and that type of thing. Creating and deleting web pages. This also includes the ability to edit, creating, editing, or deleting web pages for the site is this permission here, and that's going to be at that master menu level. Again, this is something that you'll see below, but when you do it below, you're not able to place it in your top menu. So if I have permission to create web pages, I can create web pages that would show up here in these kind of menus, as opposed to having to drill down into a team specific menu. Photo galleries are available at the master menu as well, and so you can have that permission to be able to manage photo galleries. Creating ads is available here, and again, this is something you'll see specifically at the league and team levels for just those team and league specific sponsors. Ticker announcement is only going to be at the master menu, and that's only going to show up on that one home page. So ticker announcements, I believe we have one none scroll. I have one scrolling through on mine, just about the return to play guidelines there. So ticker announcements is a permission that you will want to make sure that someone has for sure, because that's a really useful tool. And then our site configuration and standard menu settings. These are things that are really going to configure your website. So you'll find these items in your website settings area in the master menu. And these are things that really do have kind of a wide-ranging impact on how your organization is managed. So right off the bat, what I usually say, I recommend that you keep these two permissions fairly close to the chest. You don't want to necessarily let everyone have access to these features, because they could be making changes to configurations, to things like, what's the default when I view a team schedule? Is it going to be a list view or a calendar view? That's an association-wide default setting. And so you don't necessarily want to have 12 different people accessing that feature and maybe switching that every couple of days, because that does start to be a little confusing to people visiting your site. Same with standard menu settings. This is basically how you determine what goal line standard items appear in your menus and where. And once people start getting used to where your website menus are and where items are in the menu that they really want to look for, it's not really recommended or good practice really to change that super frequently. Definitely a good idea for some people to have permission to manage that, but not something that you want too many people to have access to. If you want someone, if someone is the role of webmaster or communications manager, something like that, you may want to just go ahead and give them all of these permissions. So I don't have to click off each individual box. I can say that they can have all of those specific permissions. So that's our communication tools area. The next one over is our people tools. People tools has a lot in it, and depending on some of the features that you have, you may see more or less than what we see in here. Maybe not more. I think I might have everything on in here, but some of the obvious ones in here, this is where we can give someone permission to either add, edit, or delete players, or just view players. And there is an important distinction between the two. If they're not allowed to edit or delete anybody, but you should be allowed to use find players and search for people, then absolutely make sure that they have permission to view players. That lets them access find players, and it lets them do searches, but it doesn't let them edit a profile. It will let them view a profile. And that's it. So they'd be able to see that profile, and then in their search results, they would be able to email from those search results. But adding and editing players, this is one that you definitely want to make sure is only granted to those who need it. Someone who is a registrar or a treasurer, or someone who is involved in like player rankings and tryout management, they would probably need access to add, edit, delete players there. So keep that in mind. Then we'll look at import players. So if they can add and edit players, you may want to also give them the permission to import players, but you may not necessarily. It's a personal choice that you want to make. So importing players allows people to take a CSV file with any number of players in it, and import that into the system, and it will either create them as brand new players or update the records of existing players based on their matching details in our duplicate mitigation, which is going to be based on first name, last name, and date of birth. So if they're supposed to be allowed to import a list of players all at once, then for sure grant that permission. I'll mention a couple other ways that people use import players that may be useful to you, and that would be after players have registered and they've done tryouts and teams have finally been sorted out, or perhaps you just do kind of like your own draft night and work out your team balancing and stuff for house leagues. You may want to import players to import the current team. So you're updating existing players, you're not adding new players, but you're adding a column to that saying current team, so that they can be assigned to their team through that import, rather than having to go and manually assign them or use the other options, which would be assign multiple players or through roster edit and that kind of thing. So importing players is one that you don't necessarily have to give just because they're allowed to add players. If you want them to be able to add players one at a time, they need this one. But then if you want them to be able to use a CSV file, they can use that one. Edit player info displayed from the master menu has a wide-ranging impact as well. So this is a very important permission. And I'll just point out that we have edit coach information displayed. And then I think there should be also, that's registration data. If you have volunteers and registrants, you're also going to have options for editing those. And so but I think they might be combined with our volunteers if they're just, if you have permission, that's one of the things you can do. But editing player and editing coach information displayed from the master menu allows a person to edit what information is going to display if someone chooses to look at additional details in a player search or a coach search. And that is global. So that setting applies to everyone who's doing a player search or a coach search. So using edit player info displayed or edit coach info displayed, it is recommended to keep those permissions limited as well, so you don't have people making changes constantly to what those additional details are. It also affects the information that's displayed in things like team list exports, which could be potentially your official roster report, depending on what you use that for. And it also has implications when it comes to the public side of your website. So the public side of your website has potential to be displaying rosters and player information in various ways. So when I view a roster, or when I go to view player statistics, or if I want to have league leaders displayed on a site for, who's got the most goals or assists, all of those things are affected by what information you've allowed to be displayed as part of a player's profile, as part of a player's roster, and as part of the league leaders pages. And so it is important to make sure that those permissions are kind of restricted to those who should be allowed to impact those things. Not all organizations want player information, first names and last names, for example, displayed on the public side of their website. And so especially if you have a policy regarding what information you choose to display, it is going to be really important for you to limit those who have access to that tool. I'll point out that there's going to be, we're going to talk again about edit player info displayed when we look at the league specific permissions. And so just to note that the default can be set here, but then it is going to be possible for certain leagues to make their own choices. And that's really kind of an example where maybe house leagues choose to say, we're going to only show the player's first name and jersey number. But then maybe if you have really competitive teams in other age groups, you might want to display their first name, their last name, their jersey number, and their position. So there are ways for you to be flexible, but you can set that default at the association wide, and excuse me, and it would apply to everyone until they make a change. Same as coach or players, we have the ability to add or edit coaches, and then separately the ability to view coaches. And so for the same reasons that you would be considering whether or not they should have those permissions for players, you would do that for coaches. Again, there's also an import coach option here that you can grant or not. With registrants and volunteers, you'll have the ability again to, can I just search, or can I actually add and edit registrants? With volunteers, I think that volunteers just has, it's just kind of one feature for all of the different permissions that come in with volunteers. So I can have a separate ability to search them, but then if I'm also able to add them or edit them or manage volunteer tasks, then that's going to be something that I want permission to do the volunteers for. Creating registration forms. This is a big one. So creating registration forms is obviously something that you need to grant to someone who is going to be your registrar, someone who is going to, create and publish the registration forms that your coaches and parents and referees, whoever needs them, is going to use. So creating registration forms is one single permission that provides you permission to edit, create or edit registration forms for individuals or for teams. At this time, there's no ability to grant permission to specific registration forms. You can access the feature or you cannot access the feature. So if you do have some folks who are responsible for their own programs, but not necessarily for other programs, then that is something that you want to make sure they're aware of, that when they go and click on individual registration forms, that they should only be touching their own forms so that they're not going in and making changes to other people's forms. Because if they have permission to manage forms, they're going to be able to manage all of those different forms. Executives are, that's a goal line standard item that someone can either add them or not. There's not really any additional features that go along with executives. You'll add them to your website using standard menu settings if you want that to be displayed. We use the word executive. You might call it your board or your directors or whatever it is that you label that. But that's what that feature is. The email sign up list, this is a feature that if you're using it, it means that people on the public side of your website are able to sign up to receive your emails, so that they can sign up to say, I want to receive all of your U11 boys emails, or I want to be a part of your general information subscription list. Being able to add or edit the email addresses on that email sign up list means that you are going to be able to export that list into a CSV file if you wanted to have it for posterity. It also lets you delete individual or delete the entire list of email sign up list members. So that is a permission that someone who is maybe a communications director might want access to. Add or edit website admin. So this is the feature that we're in right now. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, this is definitely a permission that is pretty powerful, because if I can do this, that means I can edit anybody else's permissions, including my own. So obviously not something that you want lots of folks to have access to. My general recommendation is that you should have at least 2 people in your organization who can edit website administrators. Your main contacts absolutely can edit website administrators. So as long as you have 2 people that are either main contact or have this permission, then that's great. And the reason I say 2 is because if somebody's not available and there's someone who sort of has an issue or kind of a crisis with the types of permissions that they have, too much or too little, then that's something that you want to have more than one person to be able to deal with, because people are allowed to go on vacations and whatnot. So want to make sure that that's something that they can always do. Our goal line support team is able to help in some cases when it comes to permissions, but we typically will not make adjustments to a user's permission without written consent from someone from the association that we have listed as a main contact. So it's just something we'd much rather you guys have channels for folks to reach out to in case there are issues there. Email aliases don't apply anymore. There may be some folks on the webinar today who have email aliases, but I'll just mention that that's not a feature available through Goalline anymore. So we're just going to skip over that one. Locked rosters, managing locked rosters is exactly what it sounds like. So there are multiple ways in the goal line system for you to lock rosters from being able to be edited. So they can't have players released, they can't have players added, they can't release coaches or add other coaches. If your rosters are locked but someone has permission to manage locked rosters, this is a specific permission granted because the association has said you're allowed to manage rosters even if they're locked. So that's a way for you to manage those things where you want the rosters to be locked, say on December 1st, but someone who contacts you on December 5th needs to make a change. Someone with the appropriate permission would be able to approve that change and go and actually do that change on their behalf. So that's a fairly important one to grant to at least someone. Again, main contact will be able to do it, but managing locked rosters is something that will have to happen from time to time if you're using the various roster lock options through Goalline. Boundary maps are related specifically to registration. They're also generally mainly applicable in Canada, but also don't apply very well in largely rural areas. So whether or not you're using them, if you have permission to do it, what it allows you to do is create a boundary map that you could then associate with a registration form to say this program requires that you live within this boundary. So it really does, on a per organization basis, you want to check and see if that does work for you, because it does work a little bit based on postal codes as folks are registering. The boundary map itself is actually a physical drawing of a map, really, but the enforcement of it is going to be based on postal codes, which is why I note that certain rural areas tend to have some difficulty with that, with one postal code covering a very large geographic area. So if you want more information about boundary maps and use with registration in your area, you can certainly reach out to our support team and ask some questions there on whether or not that would apply to you. There's a find people, which is kind of a combination of our find player, find coach, find volunteers, and registrants, and parents and referees. So find people will allow you to search any person type. It's a fairly basic search, so we can't customize the information displayed from those lists, but it is a great way to sort of see if you're looking for John Smith, and you might find that John Smith is a player and a coach and a referee within your system, or maybe a player and a parent and a coach in your system. So using find people is kind of useful in that way for you to be able to see what roles folks have, or if you're just looking for a certain name and you're not sure what their role is, it will tell you when the search results display John Smith is coach, and you'd be able to then go and edit the profile if you have permission to edit the profile. So your permission on whether or not you can add, edit, or just view is going to apply to what can you do when you're in find people. So you can either just view that result, or you would be able to actually edit it if you have appropriate permissions. The executive report is a high-level overview report that kind of aggregates some information. If you're using memberships with the system, one of those reports is going to be membership report, but there's also things like participant reports and gender distributions and income reports that kind of aggregate the details from any of your registration forms, and you can look at those historically. If you have regions or associations or child sites to your site, then the executive report allows you to do that high-level reporting on your specific regions or child sites as well. Being able to manage suspensions is just one permission to be able to manage those suspensions, and there could be various ways that those are managed. So this wouldn't really have anything to do with the automatic suspension that would happen if you happen to be a soccer organization where a red card is reported. There could potentially be automatic suspensions involved there, and you don't need permission to be able to report a game that results in a suspension. But if you needed to be able to go in and manage that suspension, say they were automatically suspended for one game, but you need them to be suspended for 3 games because there was a hearing, or you wanted to remove it altogether, all of those things are going to be combined with suspensions. There are no granular permissions with being able to only do suspensions for certain teams or divisions. So this is an overall permission, and if you can access this, then you can apply a new suspension, you can edit an existing suspension, and change what those suspensions were for, as far as like the number of games or the date in which that suspension may be no longer applicable. So suspensions is just one permission for all of those tools. If you're not using suspensions right now, you may not see this permission. If you're not using suspensions and you'd like to, you can turn that on by going to site configuration and enabling the suspensions. So that is something that you can toggle on and off. Organizations that don't tend to use it often will just turn it off, and so it's not even going to show up in here in this list. The last couple in here are going to relate to your registration data. So we talked already about being able to add or edit players or just view players. We kind of have the same thing when it comes to registration data. So am I allowed to view registration data? So I can view players, but I can't view their registration data unless I have this permission as well. And when it comes to editing registration data, this is basically saying, can I manually add registration data to a person's profile? I would obviously need the ability to add or edit players in order to have this permission work for me. But the other thing that it can do is allow me to edit an actual registration. Things like recording payments, or changing the program, or moving a registration from one person to another if it was done on maybe a duplicate is in there somewhere. That's what the edit registration is going to be able to do. So you can separate the ability to edit from being able to view registration data. So for someone who only needs to know that they've been registered, they want to be able to just view that data, then great. You can get them the ability to view players and view registration data. That lets them go to find players, search for players, view the player record, and see the registration data associated with that profile. But without the ability to edit registration data or the ability to edit players, they're not going to be able to make any changes to that person's profile. And then the last one on here is going to be person transfers. So is this person allowed to approve or deny or initiate, depending on how you have your transfers turned on, which again is going to be done through site configuration. This is the ability to manage those. So whether or not I can use the transfer tools for coaches or players is going to depend on whether or not I have this specific permission right here. So that is our people section of our permissions. And I know that's quite a lot, but a lot of them are sort of grouped together. And when we talk about roles, I'll kind of click off a few that I would recommend here. So let's move on to the schedule tools. And again, I'll reiterate, association-wide schedule tools means that you can do things here that impact the entire organization. And I'm going to work backwards this time. So we're going to go from right to left, and we'll just take a look at managing leagues and creating association teams. So these are really important settings that have a really far-reaching impact to how you're going to manage your organization. If you are a league organization or a tournament organization, it's going to be really important that you manage your leagues properly. And it's not something that I recommend that you give lots of people permission to do. Leagues are going to be a pretty key way for your site to function properly, especially if you're brand new. Getting set up right and then moving forward in the seasons correctly is going to depend a lot on how you have your league structured. Same thing with association teams. These are your rep teams. These are the teams that you're going to add in there. You're going to add in the opposing teams, the teams they play against. But then when it's a league, you're going to add all of the teams that belong to that league. That's where this import teams comes in. So being able to manage leagues, you may also got my mouse all clicky here. If you have the permission to manage leagues, you may also want the ability to import teams. This does not allow you to import association teams. This allows you to import teams that are going to belong to the leagues. So it's a great tool for tournaments who want to have placeholder teams so that they can start building out playoff schedules without knowing what teams are actually going to be registered or accepted. But it's also good if you just kind of know from year to year what teams you know you want in your leagues. And there's going to be some dependencies there. You might not ever have to do this. If you're not brand new to Goal Line, you probably already have teams in your leagues that stay largely the same from year to year. And unless you require a re-registration, you may not necessarily need that. The next one is going to be viewing schedules and managing our seasons and schedules. So being able to view schedules, I never see a problem with being able to view things like that. Being able to view schedules is a really useful thing, but being able to actually manage schedules is something that I would recommend. Managing seasons and schedules, just like teams and leagues, something that you want to keep close to the heart because you don't necessarily want everybody out there creating their own. And if you watch any of the scheduling webinars or tutorial videos that we've got, you're going to hear the recommendation a lot to make sure that these are kind of done at the same time. So my recommendation is that you have one person who manages the season for your entire organization. It makes it a lot easier, streamlines the process, gets everybody ready all at the same time, and it actually makes it sort of less actions to have to do. Same thing with managing your schedules, because what will happen sometimes is if you have inconsistency or too many people doing this, you'll find that some people will name their seasons differently or name their schedules sort of inappropriately, just not quite lining up with the conventions that you should be using. So these are permissions you can grant, but they're definitely permissions that you want to keep limited as much as possible. I'm going to say add edit venues should be limited as well. I think you should limit this to the same people who are able to manage your season or even manage your website administrators. The amount of times I have encountered in my years here, people adding duplicate venues because they use different names for the same venues, it happens a lot. And so to avoid that, making sure that that permission is restricted to only those who should really be doing that is going to help you out a lot. Being able to report multiple games. This is something that not every single organization has this available, but if you are a tournament, I strongly recommend using report multiple games. This allows you to report the game scores of multiple games at the same time. You can go back later and do and report them normally as far, using individual stats and stuff. But using report multiple games is great for a tournament. If you don't have this, contact our support team and we can get that enabled for you. adding and editing practices from the master menu, this should be granted to your scheduler, somebody who is responsible for doing that. But if your teams are responsible for managing their own practices, then maybe nobody needs this at the master menu level. I do recommend that your main contact will be able to do it, but it is definitely something where practices can be edited. So I can create a practice at the team level, and then someone else can come and edit that practice at the master menu level, and that may be appropriate based on your organization structure. And then, as I mentioned way earlier, uploading a schedule file. This allows you to upload a schedule file for any of your teams and any of your leagues, and it can include games and practices. So uploading a schedule file is a permission you want to give to anybody who's going to be your scheduler. They don't necessarily have to upload a schedule, because we do have generator options and one at a time adding of games, but this is the most popular method for folks to get schedules into Goalline, is using a CSV formatted upload file. So grant that permission to anybody who should have it. I see a question in there, so I'm just going to take a look at that. Favorites. So favorites are they're person specific, and they're also menu specific. And if you're not finding that if you've checked things off and they're not saving, then that's definitely something that we can kind of look into there. What she's referring to here is if I click on favorites, I think I have a couple of them set up for myself. Yeah, I've got a few favorites here. If you click on favorites, because if you don't have any set, it won't show up with favorites first. But if you do have them set, it will show up here first, and you can click to manage favorites or add or remove favorites here. And it, manage favorites is not the same. Sorry, add or remove favorites is what you guys would pick. And then you'd be able to select from these items here to see what do I want to have as part of my favorites. And these are going to be organized in the same order as the menu itself, as far as the menu groupings go. So you'd be able to kind of find those tools. But that should, when you go down and you save your favorites, admin favorites have been saved, return to the control panel. So we should see a few extra ones in here. So those are the new, no, maybe that didn't add all of them here for me. Or maybe did I adjust my favorites? So just one second here. So yeah, that. Okay, I see. I'm going to pick my volunteer options and just see, because that hey, we might have found a little bug to send over to the developers there. Okay, so yeah, my things did add in there. So Peggy, I can follow up with you, or have someone on the support team follow up with you on that specifically there. So let's just head back in to our manage website admins. I made the screen so big, the tiles are so huge. Okay. The last thing, and the next thing I'll do, I'm going to click on team administrator this time. But the next thing we'll look at is the officials tool. So with officials, they're again fairly straightforward. So you either can submit evaluations or just view them. You can either set preferences or just, I think, just viewing preferences. And then the officials contact list, can you update it? Can you view the contact list? Can you view official summaries? So that's going to be various reports, things like payroll summaries, game counts, and that type of thing. Can you edit the pay rates for officials? Can you view assignments, or can you only, can you edit assignments, or can you only view assignments? And then can you view officials or add or edit officials, just like our add edit players versus view players? The thing that I'll point out here is that even if you're not, as long as you're using officials, even if someone's not associated with the referee side of things, if someone is the scheduler or, a team or league coordinator, you may want to still grant them the ability to view officials assignments. It's kind of a harmless thing to grant the permission for. There's obviously politics involved when it comes, I think, to refereeing, but it's one of those things where if coaches want to be able to see who's assigned to games, or if someone needs to just be able to have oversight into games that are assigned, it allows them to go in and view the assignments that exist without being able to edit them or change them or have any impact on the referees whatsoever. It just lets them view those official assignments. And so I do see this permission granted quite a bit to team officials, so that they can go and view who's assigned to their games. Most of the time it's explained to me me anyway, that the purpose for wanting to do that is so that they know that there is definitely a referee assigned. But there are other areas in the system where you're going to see that, such as on the game sheets or potentially in things like your game summaries or master schedule on the public side. There's some configuration options that allow the referees' names to be displayed in various places. So that's just one to point out there. If they are actually an assigner, they absolutely need the ability to edit officials' assignments. You have to have edit officials' assignments. Officials' permissions get a lot more granular than just being able to edit officials' assignments. They break down to the individual division and position and potentially region level. So for specific venues. And that, I think, covers the officials tools here. So I'll just pop into the other questions here. Let's see. For COVID protocols. So one of the things that I will be talking about, and we'll actually, I'm going to go back to the league admin guys. For COVID protocols, Goal Line doesn't have necessarily a health screener built in, but one thing that we've always had is team attendance. And so team attendance it's just kind of a generic email that you would configure to say, I want this email to go out, and you can configure it to go out, say 5 days before, and then 0 days before, for example, is the game day. So 1 day before, my son has a game tonight, and I got my email today because they have it set at 0 days. And so you can set up team attendance tools to not just ask, are you coming to the game, but you can add an additional question. And I did send some information. I think we sent out some information a while ago, but I think it was before we updated our contact list. So not everybody who got today's webinar email would have received it. But the team attendance is something that you can add a custom question to. And when you do that, I'll hop into one of my leagues and just show it to you because I think I actually answered one for today. So team attendance. So team attendance is going to be found in here. So there's a couple of things that you can do in here. One is going to be to set the attendance and then be able to view it as you go. I forget what team my player was on. I'm going to assume Blizzard. That's usually what I do. So the first thing I can do before I can get data from this, I have to set it up. So I can edit my attendance options to say that I want it to automatically send out an email. I want your default to be a question mark. So I don't want to assume you're in or out. I just want to assume that you're a question mark. I can say whether or not players are allowed to make a comment, and then I can ask an additional question. So my additional question is COVID questions, ... But your COVID questions might be a little bit more specific. So the usual, paragraph of questions. So that's kind of what I like to point out here is that it's not necessarily asking a series of questions that you are asking as part of your health screening. It really is just an area for you to ask one question, and their answer is going to be either yes or no. And so it is important to frame the question in such a way that they can give you a single yes or no answer. And then, what I would recommend is, if you answer no to any of these things, then say no to the whole thing. Or if you answer yes to anything, then you have to say yes to this question. So there are ways for you to use this, and I know quite a few Goal Line organizations are using this right now as that screening for games, and it works for games and practices. So it's not just games that this is good for. It's good for games and practices. So it is that daily. You're going to the rink or the field today, so you need to answer this question today. So this is how we set it up. And then from there, you would have the ability to view it on a per game basis. So it's the 17th today, right? Upcoming. Oh, did I do it for tomorrow's game? Is that what I did? There we go. Look, so I answered, I did fill this in. So I received my attendance email. I said I was going, and I answered no to the extra question. And I didn't include any comments, but that was an option for me. I could have included a comment. And so notice how, because I filled this in, you are still able to make changes. So I could say, I could go in and change the answers to these things, but I can also send the email again, but it's only going to send the email to those who haven't completed it. So that's what our team attendants can do and sort of be used for when it comes to the health screening and the daily screening that you have there. Of course, a lot of folks are just using, Google Sheets and things like that. So there's lots of different ways that people are tackling that. There is a Stack product that has a health screening tool in it, but it's not something that we can combine with goal line schedules at this time, but maybe someday we'll do that. And we also, I mean, this is definitely, it's a big priority for everybody. So that information as well, this information can be exported and it's never deleted. I know here in Nova Scotia, our rule is that you have to keep that information for 2 months. And I'm not sure if that's the same everywhere, but this information is never deleted. It's always going to be available and you can export it so that you can save it forever. But goal line will never delete it for you anyway. So let's get back into our league permissions here. We'll talk about the league-specific permissions, and because we've already gone over most of these at the association level, I think we'll breeze through these no problem here. So our communication tools, as I mentioned, so news articles, uploading files, sending announcements, creating events, deleting, editing or deleting web pages, or creating ads. You can grant these permissions here, but notice there's no standard menu settings or site configuration because we're in a league-specific menu at that point. And if I do any of these things, I'm only impacting my one league. The exception, of course, is going to be events, because any event you create is going to be accumulated on your master schedule, but it's not an event I create for dodgeball is not going to show up on the volleyball schedule unless they happen to be looking at the master schedule. So events that are league specific are only going to show up for that league, but they'll also show in the master schedule on the public side. That's if you've chosen to display that. League admin tools are going to be very similar to our people tools above. And so we've got our add, edit players, or view and edit team rosters. There is a difference between being able to add or edit a player and being able to view and edit a roster. So being able to view and edit a roster means that I can add players to my roster, but they have to be existing players, and I can release players from my roster, but I can't edit the players themselves. So if I need to be able to edit the player themselves, so maybe adjust their jersey number or also adjust their position or any other personal information in their profile, I need both of these permissions to be able to view and edit the players on that roster. Edit player info displayed, as I discussed earlier, this is how I would make an impact on just my league and what we choose to display. And this is only going to allow me to make changes to things that affect my league. So my public roster display, my public league leaders display, and my team list export. The player search functions and all of that stuff is all master menu only. Association wide only, I should say. So this is something you can do here. So if the association says we only display first name and jersey number for rosters, you would be able to go in and say, for our league, we're also going to show you hometown or whatever else you might want to show. Importing players, again, this allows me to import players. They would automatically either be assigned as unassigned to a team but part of dodgeball, or I can assign them to their specific teams that belong to the dodgeball league using that import. So importing players uses that CSV formatted file, and it will either create or update the records of existing players. Add, edit, delete teams allows me to add, edit, or delete the teams that belong to this league. So that's where I add in the teams that I'm going to be able to schedule. So dodgeball is the league, and then team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the teams. So I can add, edit, delete teams, but I can also import those teams if I have them in a list, and I'd rather just upload them into a CSV file. Adding, editing coaches and editing coach info display. This is the same as the player ones. Whether I can do it, whether I can change the information displayed about my coaches, whether I can import coaches. Assigning multiple players kind of piggybacks on whether or not I have players that are assigned to dodgeball, but not assigned to teams within the dodgeball league. This is really commonly used in a lot of house leagues or any kind of social leagues where people just register as a person and they get distributed onto teams. So assign multiple players is great for that. And so if they should be able to do that, you can do that. Managing locked rosters, we see this again. This gives me the permission to do it for only the dodgeball league, whereas the permission above lets me do it for anyone. And then viewing and editing the team attendance, which we just took a good look at. Schedule tools, again, same idea, is that when we do this, we're only able to impact the things within our specific league. So can I change my schedule details? Can I create games? Can I add practices for, these are going to be for the teams that belong within this league. Can I manage venues? I strongly recommend that no one adds venues from the team or league level. I think that that's something that should be at the master menu level, but it's up to you guys how you do that. And then trading and claiming venue time, this relates directly to practices. If you schedule a practice, so you've got a gym booked for a practice, but you can't use it, you can trade that. So you can either give people permission for that or not. If they can't do it, then they would just do whatever they're going to do to get that gym time reused. And then maybe it's just a matter of editing the practice. So instead of the Blizzard, it's going to be the Lightning using that. Uploading a schedule file from here means I can upload a schedule file including games and practices for any of the teams that belong to just this one league. Venue usage summaries is just a report. No harm in granting that. It's a really great way to see who's used what venues for what purpose. So home games, away games, and practices. And it will show you across all of the venues how many hours worth of time the teams have used each of those venues. If you have a premium venue in your area and you want to make sure that you're using the venue time appropriately or distributing it amongst your teams properly, that's the report to check. Viewmaster schedule is exactly that. It's just a view of the schedule. It lets you view all schedules for all teams and leagues within the entire organization, but as a complete view only, and it's back end, so it's not publicly available. Managing schedules and managing seasons, I do recommend that you leave these at the master menu and don't grant them at the league menu. But if you do, then what happens here, I can manage the season and schedule for dodgeball, but I can't do anything that's going to impact volleyball or lacrosse. And then viewing schedules, same idea. It's just to be able to view that schedule. Then we have report games, lock games, and then if you happen to be baseball or softball, you'll see a pitch count. Report games and lock games is something that at the league level, you would probably want to give someone permission for both of these so that they can report a game and then lock the game score and potentially be able to unlock it. At the team level, you don't want the team level to be able to lock or unlock games. You want them to be able to report but not lock. So this is something that at the league level is going to be pretty key for someone like a league coordinator or a league convener, or someone who is maybe the statistician who's in charge of kind of making those stats official. So those are the league specific permissions. And as usual, I have gone over in time and I am so sorry, but we'll breeze through the team stuff and then I'll open it up for questions if there are any more questions here. So I'm looking now at a team administrator and we're going to see it's almost the same as our league style ones. The communication tools is going to be exactly the same. It's just that it's only going to be a permission for the one team you're granting access to. Obviously, I'm saying one team, but I could be giving you this permission for both teams or multiple teams, many teams. But these permissions are exactly the same in communication tools. In team admin, they're almost exactly the same. What I'll point out here is when you're adding teams or add, edit, delete teams or importing teams, you're adding the opposing teams. So if my team is IH Robotics and we play against teams 4, 5, and 6, then I'm going to use this tool to add teams 4, 5, and 6. So it is a permission that doesn't need to be available to everyone, but it is something that needs to be added in there. So either you at the association level are going to go and set up this kind of stuff for a team admin, or you need them to go in and do it themselves. So depending on who's responsible for doing it, you may want to grant that permission at the team level. Uploading a team photo is something that you can let them do or not, and this is really just at the team level. So if somebody wants to go view that team page, they would see that. Managing locked rosters is the same thing. Managing password team pages. So that's what we see over here. We don't, not a huge number of organizations are using these, but what's useful about these is it lets you, if I can do this, then it means that I'm the one that can come in and say, save what is going to be password protected for our team. Some teams and clubs are pretty picky about player stats and player rosters being available to just anybody, but not necessarily wanting to hide them from everyone. So if you want them to be available based on a password, then you can set up password team pages. Posting tryouts and skill sessions, those are pretty self-explanatory. They're items that are going to go in your schedule. Exporting your team list is exactly that as well. So it's, what did I do? It's just going to show, the team list, so all of the players and all of the coaches based on the edit player info displayed for your team, your league, or the association, depending on who set that. And then again, viewing attendance, but this would obviously just be for your one team. Any of these other scheduling ones, these are all just specific to the team. If you're a league team, you really shouldn't have any of these master, I keep clicking on that, shouldn't have any of the managing schedule or managing seasons, but being able to create games, create practices, trade your schedule time, maybe uploading a schedule file, those are all reasonable things. And then we have the report game stats. So notice how that team level doesn't have permission to go and lock or unlock. So Peggy's asking how to view things, how to view your site. So that is something, so I do recommend actually, Peggy, you might want to check out the last webinar that we did, which was on the new UI, because we have a new menu over here and it's pretty fun. I do like it, but we are not used to it yet. I'm not used to it yet either, but go to site. So if you find your initials up in the top corner here, go to site, that's going to take you to your public facing website. So those are the team permissions, actually. So those are the team permissions, but the password protected team pages, if you don't see this and you're interested in that, that is something that we do have to enable specifically for you. But other than that, everybody should kind of see a very similar set of things. So when it comes to our specific types of people, there are some kind of obvious ones that are going to be important. So I'll just run through really quickly. If you're adding a website admin who's a registrar, their job is to be a registrar. What I recommend for permissions for that person is that they can send email announcements. I would also recommend that they can at least view players and view and edit registration data, and that they should also be able to create registration forms. But then I guess if they're a registrar and they need to search coaches as well, then you would also want them to have the view coaches option there too. So if they need to do these things, then those are the permissions that I typically recommend, just because they're the ones that need to go and look at those kind of reports, be able to do a registration search, be able to email the association about registration information. Same thing goes with the treasurer. Treasurer, I'd recommend very similar permissions. If you are a team manager or a coach, then at the association level, I don't think that you need any permissions. I think that you would really want permissions at the team specific level. And you can just grant everybody everything. But as I pointed out earlier, I do strongly recommend really limiting some of these schedule tools. So what I would typically do is give them permission to add or edit their own practices, to be able to create their own games, to be able to manage their team attendance, to view and edit their roster, but not necessarily view or edit the actual players on their roster. And unless you have a good use case for it, I don't recommend that they get any other permissions in here at all, really. If you are using team pages and you want, you want them to be posting news and things like that, then you certainly could go ahead and grant them access to, news articles and creating events for their team and photo galleries and whatnot. So those are kind of choices, but the ones that they kind of need are going to be to add or edit their team rosters. manage the team attendance, and then add or edit practices. And then the key one, I think, is going to be reporting game scores. That's a pretty important one that most of the time that I come across anyway, it's required. So that is what I recommend for a team manager or a coach. A league coordinator is going to be a little bit different. A league coordinator, you're going to be creating that league level administrator, and I would strongly recommend that they have permission to report game scores and lock game scores, to be able to add edit players and view edit team rosters, viewing the team attendance as well, because they may need to go and export that information. And then potentially they would be the ones that you would want to grant that permission to edit player info displayed, if they are someone who should be allowed to be in charge of that. And then when it comes to scheduling, obviously being able to create games, being able to create practices, upload schedule files, those are kind of some key ones. And then depending on how you manage who creates the season and schedule to begin with, you may also need to grant them some of these other permissions, but recommended is going to be some of this is kind of like the league convener light version, where they have the permissions they absolutely need, but anything else is going to be handled by the association. A scheduler would probably need more permission. So a scheduler is the one that I would probably give virtually all of these permissions to. I mean, report multiple games is kind of inconsequential if I'm just adding games, but that is something that you would virtually want to give them almost all of these permissions, because you want to make sure that they're able to confirm that they're set up properly at the beginning of every season. And then when it comes to the league permissions, I'm just going to scroll down here that you can click all across some specific permissions. So if I want them to be able to create games, add, edit games, and upload schedule files, report games, and lock scores for every single one of my leagues, I can do it this way. So I don't have to go and click across like this. I'm able to do it that way. So a league can be an association-wide scheduler. It needs permissions at both the master menu and in the league specific areas, so that they're able to just kind of get more specific and manage schedules that way. This is also where they would need permissions in order to use the schedule generator if you wanted to grant them permission for that. And then the last role that I'll talk about real quick is going to be that communications or webmaster person. And that's when you want to grant them virtually all of these permissions. Depending on how set up you are, you may want to remove some of these permissions, because I can impact my menu by just creating web pages and placing them where I want them without affecting the general overall setup of the menu. And then other permissions in here are going to be pretty key for them to be able to get their communications out. And then at the league and team specific level, you could be granting them those types of permissions as well. But virtually everything they're going to need to do is going to be at the master menu. For example, they're able to create a news article at the master menu, and there's going to be a checkbox that says, do you want this also to be pushed through to the teams and leagues? So I don't need to recreate a news article on multiple levels. I can create it here and push it down to my leagues and my teams. So that communications or webmaster person would want these communication tool roles, and then possibly the ability to view players. And as I mentioned earlier, the sign up list, email sign up list over here is going to be one that would be pretty key for them as well. And as soon as they can do this permission and have the ability to send email announcements, there's also going to be an unsubscribed email address tool that they're going to be able to review as well, just with respect to folks who have opted out of receiving your emails. And then again, I'm so sorry, the last thing is going to be this manage user roles. So what manage user roles is, and the reason that I just want to talk about it last, is because it doesn't necessarily, if you have a person who has, if you have a lot of administrators, like hundreds of admins, and they've all got kind of a bucket of permissions, then this is useful. But if you have a handful of administrators and they're like most volunteer organizations where a person wears many, many hats, it doesn't always fit the mold. And so if your user role is very specific, you can provide the role and make it say webmaster, just to make it simple here, and say a webmaster, if that's your role, you have permission to do all of these things, and then nothing else. And so those are important permissions to be able to grant. I don't have to give out any of these other ones, but maybe I give this one. And so I save these as a user role, and it becomes a role that when I'm creating an administrator next, I'm able to assign that role to them, and it automatically applies the permissions that are set up. So if I wanted to set somebody up as a lead convener, then that's going to give them those default permissions. But this note is very important, that if I assign a role, it's going to override any additional permissions you might have tried to grant that person. So if you've tried to adjust somebody's permissions and it just keeps reverting back, it might be because they have a role here, and you would just go and say no role because I'm going to grant them custom permissions. So that's what the user role is all about there. So it may apply to you as it might fit well with the way you grant permissions, but it doesn't necessarily fit everyone. So I do like to point that out, that it's available. But if you're really most volunteer organizations, like I said, we wear lots of different hats and do lots of different things. So one person who's the registrar, quote unquote, might also be kind of the webmaster too, and that kind of thing. And so that user role, it's very specific. It really will pigeonhole them into the specific permissions set up with that exact role. And so you don't want to limit that if it doesn't work for you or work for the individuals you apply it to. So that is our user permissions webinar. I don't think I've ever actually done a full webinar just talking about website admin permissions. So I think that was really long overdue for sure. If there are any questions, I am all ears here, or all eyes, I should say, to read the chat. But any questions that you guys have, I've got a few minutes to hang around and get those answered for you. All right, well, it doesn't sound like there's any questions there. So I guess that's the end of today's webinar, and I look forward to our next one. I haven't quite got the topic just yet, but keep an eye out on your emails there for the next topics in the webinar. And as I said, any questions about accessing previous webinars, you can email customersuccess@stacksports.com, and we can make sure that you get a list of our previously recorded webinars. So thanks so much for coming out, everybody. Really appreciate your time. Have a great day.